Dr. Margaret Thompson pressed her face against the cold viewport of the research ship Endeavour. In the darkness of space ahead, something impossible floated among the stars. The object was massive, bigger than any space station humanity had ever built. It looked like a giant crystal, but crystals this size could not exist. Strange patterns of blue and green light moved across its surface like water flowing uphill. "Captain Hayes, are you seeing this?" Margaret called out, her voice shaking with excitement. Captain William Hayes moved beside her at the window. His weathered face showed the same amazement Margaret felt. Behind them, the ship's crew worked at their stations, but everyone kept glancing up at the strange object ahead. It appeared 3 days ago, Lieutenant James Morrison reported from his position at the navigation controls. "Our long-range sensors detected it first. No one knows where it came from or how it got here." Margaret had spent 15 years studying alien artifacts, but nothing had prepared her for this. The object was clearly artificial, clearly built by intelligent beings, but it was unlike anything in their databases. The patterns of light seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Dr. Thompson," came a translated voice from their Altarian colleague. The tall, gray-skinned alien stood at the science station, his large black eyes focused on the readings. "Our scans show the structure contains quantum storage matrices. The data capacity appears to be unlimited." Margaret felt her heart race. Unlimited data storage meant this could be some kind of library or archive. But who had built it? And why was it here, in this empty region of space? Their expedition included scientists from 3 different species. The Altarians were masters of quantum technology. The Kepler beings excelled at energy manipulation. Humans brought their curiosity and adaptability. Together, they hoped to unlock the secrets of this mysterious structure. As the Endeavour moved closer, the crystal object seemed to respond. The light patterns grew brighter and more complex. New colors appeared, gold and silver streams that had not been there before. "Captain, we're receiving some kind of signal," Communications Officer Thomas Fletcher announced. "It's not using any known transmission method, but somehow our universal translator is picking it up." William Hayes straightened. "Put it through the speakers." Static filled the bridge, then cleared into something that sounded almost like music. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, unlike anything from Earth or the known alien worlds. Then, suddenly, words emerged from the harmony. "Welcome, travelers from distant worlds. I have waited long ages for your arrival." Margaret grabbed the nearest console for support. The voice was speaking directly to them. The crystal was alive, or at least intelligent. "I am the archive," the voice continued, ancient and patient. "I am the keeper of memories, the guardian of stories from 1,000 worlds. I have watched civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a cosmic shore." Captain Hayes found his voice first. "Archive, we are explorers seeking knowledge. What is this place?" "This place is memory itself," the archive replied. "Within me rest the histories of species that once filled the galaxy with their songs, their wars, their loves, their discoveries. Some of these civilizations reached heights that would amaze you. Others fell to darkness of their own making." Dr. Robert Chin, their cultural specialist, stepped forward. "Why are you speaking to us? What makes us special?" The archive was quiet for a long moment. The light patterns on its surface slowed and grew more steady, as if it was thinking deeply. "You humans puzzle your galactic neighbors," the archive finally said. "They see your advanced technology, your space travel, your scientific achievements. Yet you still gather in ancient buildings to sing old songs to invisible gods. You still tell stories that your ancestors told thousands of years ago. You still believe in things you cannot prove." Margaret felt a flush of embarrassment. It was true that humans were often seen as primitive by other species because they maintained their religions. Most alien civilizations had abandoned such things long ago as they advanced scientifically. "Your neighbors think this makes you backward," the archive continued. "They believe you should have outgrown such things by now. But I have seen what they have not. I have watched what happens to species that abandon their ancient wisdoms." The crystal structure pulsed brighter, and suddenly the space around their ship filled with holographic images. Margaret gasped as she saw the ghosts of alien cities, empty and silent. Magnificent structures stood abandoned under foreign stars. "These are the Veltharians," the archive explained, showing them towering spires of living metal. "They conquered death itself and reshaped worlds with their thoughts. They called their old beliefs foolish superstitions and cast them aside." The images changed, showing another world with geometric cities that sparkled like diamonds. The Caridian collective achieved perfect harmony between all living things. They laughed at their ancestral myths and chose pure logic instead. More images flowed past, species after species, all technologically advanced, all apparently successful. But Margaret noticed something troubling. Despite their magnificent achievements, all the cities looked the same. They were empty. "What happened to them?" she whispered. "That," said the archive, "is why I have been waiting for you. Your species maintains something these others lost, something they needed more than they knew. You carry within your cultures a wisdom that has kept you alive when others have perished." The holographic images faded, leaving only the gentle glow of the archive itself. "Will you hear the story of the galaxy's greatest tragedy?" the archive asked. "Will you learn why your ancient songs and stories may be the most important things your species possesses?" Margaret looked around the bridge. Every face showed the same mixture of fear and fascination. They had come seeking scientific knowledge, but had stumbled upon something far more profound. The greatest discovery in human history might not be new technology or alien science. It might be learning why humanity's oldest traditions were actually their greatest treasure. The main display screen of the Endeavour filled with swirling colors as the archive began to share its memories. Margaret watched in wonder as alien worlds materialized before them like living paintings. The first world showed cities that seemed to grow from the ground itself, their walls breathing and pulsing with life. The Veltharian Empire, the archive explained in its ancient voice. They mastered the art of biological engineering 20,000 years before your species learned to make fire. Watch their story unfold. The holographic display showed tall, graceful beings with silver skin and flowing movements. They had built cities that were alive, ships that healed themselves, and bodies that never aged. Margaret saw them in their temples, singing to something they called the Great Flow, an invisible force they believed connected all living things. For millennia they thrived, the archive continued. Their population grew, their knowledge expanded, their joy was boundless. But as they learned more about the universe, some began to question their old beliefs. The scene changed. Margaret watched Veltharian scientists studying the Great Flow with instruments, trying to measure and understand it. Their faces showed confusion and disappointment. They discovered that their sacred Great Flow was simply quantum field fluctuations, the archive explained. Natural forces, nothing more. No consciousness, no divine purpose, just physics. Dr. Robert Chin leaned forward, studying the aliens' expressions. They looked disappointed. Indeed. Once they understood the mechanism, the mystery was gone. Why pray to quantum fields? Why sing to natural forces? One by one they abandoned their temples. The display fast-forwarded through years of change. The living cities still pulsed with life, but fewer Veltharians walked their streets. The beings moved more slowly, their faces blank and empty. Within 50 generations their birth rate fell to nearly zero, the archive said sadly. They had achieved immortality, perfect health, unlimited resources. They could create anything they desired with a thought. Yet they chose to create nothing at all. Lieutenant Morrison stared at the empty cities. But why? They had everything they needed to be happy. Did they? The archive asked. Watch the final days. The hologram showed the last Veltharians sitting in their beautiful cities, staring at nothing. Some simply lay down and chose to sleep forever. Others stood motionless for decades, alive but not living. The great civilization that had once filled dozens of star systems simply stopped. They had everything except a reason to continue, the archive explained as the images faded. Captain Hayes shook his head. One example doesn't prove a pattern. You are correct, the archive agreed. Observe the Caridian Collective. New images filled the space around them. This time, Margaret saw insect-like beings with compound eyes and delicate wings. They lived in geometric cities that looked like enormous honeycombs, each structure perfectly aligned with mathematical precision. The Caridians believed in the hive dreams, the archive explained. They thought all consciousness was connected through invisible webs that stretched across the cosmos. In their religion, every thought and action rippled through this cosmic web, affecting all life everywhere. The holographic Caridians moved in perfect harmony, their actions coordinated as if they shared a single mind. They built incredible technologies and achieved peace across hundreds of worlds. But their scientists made a discovery, the archive continued. They learned that consciousness was produced by neurochemistry, nothing more. No cosmic web existed. No invisible connections. Each mind was alone. Margaret watched as the Caridians' perfect harmony began to break down. Without believing they were connected to something greater, they stopped working together. Their cities fell into disrepair as each individual focused only on themselves. Within 30 cycles they entered what they called the Great Dormancy. An entire species chose to sleep rather than face a universe that felt empty and meaningless. Thomas Fletcher looked puzzled. But they still had their families, their communities, their achievements. Yes, but without the belief that these things mattered beyond their immediate experience, they felt no motivation to maintain them, the archive explained. The display changed again, showing species after species. The quantum courts of Xerion, beings of pure energy who had once believed they were fragments of a divine light. The crystalline confederacy, who had thought their crystal bodies were gifts from cosmic architects. The thermal dynasties who had worshipped the stars as living ancestors. Each civilization had reached incredible heights. Each had discovered that their religious beliefs had scientific explanations. Each had abandoned their ancient traditions as primitive superstitions. And each had eventually faded away, despite having solved every material problem they faced. The pattern is always the same, the archive said as hundreds of dead worlds flashed past. First, they achieve great technological advancement. Then, they use that technology to examine their beliefs. When they find natural explanations for what they once thought was divine, they abandon their spiritual practices. Finally, without frameworks to give their lives meaning beyond immediate pleasure or knowledge, they lose the will to continue as a species. Dr. Elizabeth Barnes, their team psychologist, had been silent throughout the display. Now she spoke quietly. How many civilizations have you recorded with this pattern? 3,742 documented cases, the archive replied. Some took centuries to fade away. Others collapsed within a few generations. But all followed the same path once they abandoned what you humans might call their faith. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. And the civilizations that survived? Ah, the archive said, and she could hear something like hope in its ancient voice. Those are far rarer. But they do exist. They found ways to maintain their sense of purpose and meaning even as their knowledge grew. They learned to hold both scientific understanding and spiritual wisdom in balance. The holographic display cleared, leaving only the gentle glow of the archive itself. Your species stands at a crossroads, humans of Earth. You have achieved space flight and advanced technology, yet you still gather in your churches and mosques and temples. Your galactic neighbors see this as a weakness, but I see it as your greatest strength. The question is whether you will learn from the mistakes of those who came before or repeat them. The archive's crystalline surface began to glow more brightly, and suddenly the space around the Endeavor filled with complex diagrams that hurt Margaret's eyes to look at directly. Charts and graphs floated in the air, showing patterns that seemed to move and shift like living things. To understand why civilizations die when they abandon their beliefs, you must understand how meaning works in the mind of any thinking being, the archive explained. Its ancient voice took on the tone of a patient teacher. Observe these neural patterns. The display showed what looked like a brain but not quite human. The neural pathways glowed with different colors as thoughts moved through them. Margaret watched as certain areas lit up when the brain processed different types of information. This is a Zephyrian brain, the archive continued. The Zephyrians were much like humans, curious, social, driven to understand their world. For thousands of years, they believed their ancestors watched over them from the great beyond. This belief created specific patterns in their minds. Dr. Barnes studied the glowing neural map with fascination. What kind of patterns? Watch what happens when a Zephyrian thinks about their daily work, the archive said. The brain display showed pathways lighting up in steady, purposeful patterns. They are not just performing tasks. They believe their ancestors are watching, judging, caring about their efforts. This gives their work meaning beyond simple survival. The scene changed to show Zephyrian families gathered around tables, sharing meals and stories. Their brain patterns showed complex networks of connection and purpose. Now observe what happened after their scientists proved that consciousness ends at death, the archive continued. The brain patterns suddenly became much simpler, smaller. Without belief in watching ancestors, their work became just work. Their relationships became just chemical reactions in their brains. Lieutenant Morrison frowned as he studied the simplified patterns. The brain activity looked so empty. Precisely. When beings lose their frameworks of meaning, their neural activity becomes focused only on immediate needs and pleasures. They lose what I call transcendent motivation, the drive to act for purposes beyond themselves. The display changed to show the harmonious collective of Nexus Prime, a species that had tried to replace their old religion with pure pleasure-seeking. Margaret watched as their technology created perfect environments where every desire could be fulfilled instantly. The collective believed that happiness was the highest goal, the archive explained. They built machines that could provide any experience, any sensation, any form of entertainment. They achieved perfect contentment. The holographic beings lounged in beautiful gardens where machines catered to their every whim. They looked peaceful and satisfied, but something about their expressions troubled Margaret. Their eyes seemed vacant, unfocused. Within 200 cycles their birth rate dropped to 0, the archive continued. Not because they were unhappy but because they were too content. Without challenges that felt meaningful, without struggles that served a greater purpose, they simply lost interest in continuing. Captain Hayes studied the peaceful but lifeless scenes. They had everything they wanted but wanted nothing more. Exactly. Pleasure without purpose becomes emptiness. Comfort without challenge becomes stagnation. The display shifted again, showing the technocracy of Kepler 7. These beings looked almost robotic, their movements precise and calculated. Margaret watched them in their laboratories, making incredible discoveries about the nature of reality itself. The Keplers tried to replace their spiritual traditions with pure scientific pursuit, the archive explained. They believed that knowledge alone could provide sufficient meaning. For several centuries this worked. Their excitement about each new discovery drove them forward. Dr. Chen watched the Kepler scientists celebrating their achievements. What went wrong? They eventually learned too much, the archive said sadly. They discovered the fundamental equations that govern all existence. They mapped every particle, predicted every interaction, understood every force. The universe held no more mysteries for them. The holographic Keplers gradually slowed in their movements. Their celebrations became smaller, less frequent, until finally they stopped entirely. Margaret watched as they sat in their perfect laboratories, surrounded by all the knowledge of creation, completely motionless. Knowledge without wonder becomes mere data, the archive explained. When mystery disappears, curiosity dies. When curiosity dies, the drive to continue learning dies with it. Thomas Fletcher looked confused. But surely they could have found other purposes? Art, relationships, exploration. Observe their attempts, the archive replied. The display showed Keplers trying to create art, but their perfect understanding of aesthetics made every creation feel mechanical. They attempted to form relationships, but their complete knowledge of psychology made every emotion feel predictable and shallow. The more they understood the mechanisms behind experience, the less those experiences meant to them, the archive explained. They had solved the puzzle of existence so completely that existence itself felt like a solved puzzle, interesting once but not worth repeating. Margaret felt a growing horror as she understood what she was seeing. So knowledge and pleasure and achievement, none of these can sustain a civilization long-term? Not alone, the archive confirmed. Observe the essential difference. The display split, showing two types of civilizations side by side. On one side were the failed species they had already seen, the Veltharians, Caridians, Keplers, and others. On the other side were species Margaret had never seen before, beings who looked vibrant and alive even as they used advanced technology. The failed civilizations sought to understand and control everything, including the sources of their own meaning, the archive explained. When they succeeded, they destroyed the very mystery and transcendence that had motivated them. The surviving civilizations learned to preserve sacred mysteries alongside scientific knowledge. They maintained beliefs and practices that generated meaning, purpose, and wonder, even when they could not fully explain or prove these beliefs. Dr. Barnes leaned forward intently. You're saying that some level of faith, of believing in things beyond complete understanding, is necessary for long-term survival? Not faith exactly, the archive corrected. Rather, the wisdom to know that some aspects of existence must remain sacred, mysterious, beyond complete analysis. The moment you fully understand and control your sources of meaning, they cease to provide meaning. The holographic displays faded, leaving the crew in contemplative silence. Margaret realized they had just learned something that changed everything she thought she knew about the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, between science and spirit. The archive's gentle glow pulsed like a heartbeat in the darkness of space. The archive's surface began to shimmer with new patterns, and suddenly the space around the Endeavour filled with images of Earth. Margaret gasped as she saw her home planet from space, its blue oceans and white clouds looking impossibly beautiful against the star-filled darkness. Now we come to your species, the archive said, and something in its ancient voice sounded almost fond. Humanity presents a puzzle that has fascinated me for centuries. The holographic display zoomed closer to Earth, showing cities filled with tall buildings and advanced technology. Margaret could see spacecraft launching from Earth's surface, massive solar collectors in orbit, and scientific stations on the moon. It was clearly an advanced civilization. Your species has achieved remarkable technological progress, the archive continued. You have split the atom, mapped your genetic code, sent probes to distant stars. Your computers can process information faster than most biological minds. Yet, the scene changed to show the interior of a simple church. Margaret watched as hundreds of humans gathered together, singing ancient hymns and listening to stories that were thousands of years old. The contrast with the high-tech cities was striking. You still gather in buildings designed like those your ancestors built millennia ago. You still sing songs your great-grandparents sang. You still tell stories about invisible beings who created the universe. Dr. Chen looked embarrassed. Other species often comment on this. They think we're primitive. They think you are backward, the archive agreed. But observe what they do not see. The display split to show different religious gatherings around Earth. In one section, Margaret saw Muslims praying together in perfect synchronization. In another, Buddhist monks sat in silent meditation. A third showed Jewish families sharing meals and ancient traditions. Christians gathered in prayer, Hindus celebrated colorful festivals, and countless other groups maintained their own unique practices. Your galactic neighbors see this diversity of belief as evidence of confusion, the archive explained. They assumed that if humans were truly advanced, you would have settled on one correct understanding of reality by now. But they missed the deeper pattern. The images zoomed in to show the faces of the worshippers. Margaret was struck by something she had never noticed before. Despite their different beliefs and practices, all the faces showed similar expressions. There was peace there and hope and a kind of deep contentment. Every human religion, despite its unique features, provides the same essential elements, the archive continued. Watch carefully. The display highlighted specific moments from each tradition. Margaret saw Christians speaking of eternal life after death, Muslims submitting to Allah's greater plan, Buddhists finding peace in accepting life's suffering, Jews celebrating their covenant with God, Hindus seeking unity with the divine. Each tradition tells your species that individual existence is part of something larger and more important, the archive explained. Each provides stories that give meaning to suffering and death. Each creates communities bound by shared purpose. Each offers practices that generate experiences of transcendence. Lieutenant Morrison studied the images with new interest. They're all providing the same psychological functions, just through different methods. Precisely. Your species has unconsciously evolved what I call meaning-making technologies, cultural systems that maintain existential resilience across generations. The scene changed to show brain scans of humans during religious activities. Margaret watched as neural pathways lit up in complex, beautiful patterns during prayer and meditation. The activity looked remarkably similar to the healthy brain patterns the archive had shown them earlier. When humans engage in religious practice, your brains activate networks that generate hope, purpose, and connection, the archive explained. These are not primitive superstitions, they are sophisticated psychological tools that keep your species motivated to continue growing and striving. Dr. Barnes looked fascinated as she studied the brain scans. The neural activity looks almost like immunization against despair. An excellent analogy. Your religious practices create what I call existential antibodies, psychological defenses against the meaninglessness that has destroyed so many other civilizations. The display showed examples of how these defenses worked. Margaret watched humans facing terrible tragedies, war, disease, natural disasters, personal losses. In each case, their religious frameworks provided ways to understand and cope with suffering that didn't lead to complete despair. When humans encounter meaninglessness, your traditions offer alternative explanations, the archive continued. A Christian who suffers can see it as part of God's plan. A Buddhist can accept it as the natural way of existence. A Muslim can trust that Allah knows best. These beliefs may not be scientifically provable, but they prevent the existential collapse that destroys species who have no such frameworks. Captain Hayes looked thoughtful as he watched the images of human resilience. So our diversity of beliefs actually makes us stronger, not weaker? Indeed. Multiple traditions provide multiple pathways to meaning and purpose. If one fails to resonate with an individual human, others remain available. This redundancy has protected your species from the all-or-nothing failures that have claimed other civilizations. The archive showed the contrast clearly. On one side were the extinct alien species, each of which had developed single unified worldviews before abandoning them entirely. On the other side were humans, maintaining dozens of different but functionally similar meaning-making systems. The Veltharians had only their great flow. When they stopped believing in it, they had nothing else. The Caridians had only their hive dreams. When those proved false, their entire civilization collapsed, the archive explained. But humans who lose faith in one tradition can often find meaning in another. Your diversity provides stability. Margaret felt a strange mix of pride and humility as she watched the images of her species. We've been doing this unconsciously? Completely unconsciously. Your species has stumbled upon one of the rarest achievements in galactic history, the ability to maintain technological advancement while preserving existential resilience. You are advancing scientifically without destroying the very beliefs and practices that motivate you to advance. The holographic Earth slowly rotated before them, showing the lights of cities and the gatherings of countless communities maintaining their ancient traditions alongside their modern achievements. This is why I wanted to speak with humans specifically, the archive concluded. You possess something extraordinarily precious, a living example of how intelligent species can survive their own success. The question now is whether you will recognize this treasure and protect it, or follow the same path as those who came before. The images faded, leaving them surrounded once again by the gentle glow of the archive in the darkness of space. The silence on the bridge of the Endeavour stretched for long minutes as the crew absorbed everything they had learned. Margaret stared out at the archive's gentle glow, her mind racing with the implications of what she had witnessed. Around her, she could hear the quiet breathing of her crewmates and the soft hum of the ship's systems. Captain Hayes was the first to speak. Archive, what you're telling us. It changes everything we thought we knew about human civilization. It should, the archive replied gently. Your species stands at a crossroads that few civilizations ever reach. You have advanced far enough to begin questioning your foundational beliefs, yet you still maintain them. This balance is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily fragile. Dr. Barnes looked troubled as she studied the data they had gathered. But if we return to Earth with this knowledge, won't it have the same effect on humanity that scientific understanding had on the other species? Once people know that their religions serve a psychological function, won't they lose faith in them? The archive's light patterns shifted to deeper, more serious colors. This is the greatest danger you now face. Knowledge of the mechanism can destroy the mechanism itself. I have seen civilizations learn these truths and, in their pride at understanding, lose the very beliefs that kept them alive. Thomas Fletcher frowned as he processed this. So we're trapped? We can't share what we've learned because sharing it might destroy us. Not trapped, the archive corrected. But you must be extremely careful. The challenge is to honor both your scientific nature and your spiritual wisdom. You must find ways to grow in knowledge without losing wonder, to understand mechanisms without reducing everything to mere mechanism. Margaret thought about the churches and temples back on Earth, filled with people seeking meaning and connection. How do we tell humanity that their faiths are evolutionarily important without making those faiths feel like just tools for survival? By understanding that truth operates on multiple levels, the archive explained. A Christian prayer can simultaneously be a neurological process, a cultural practice, and a genuine communication with the divine. A Buddhist meditation can be brain chemistry, psychological technique, and spiritual enlightenment. These explanations do not cancel each other out. The display around them filled with images of the few civilizations that had successfully navigated this challenge. Margaret saw beings who used advanced technology while maintaining ancient rituals, species who understood the science of consciousness while still believing in transcendent purpose. The eternal dancers of Proxima learned to see their scientific discoveries as revealing more of their god's magnificence, not less, the archive explained, showing graceful beings who combined laboratory work with sacred movement. The crystal singers of Vega taught that understanding how their songs affected brain chemistry made the songs more precious, not less meaningful. Dr. Chen studied these successful examples carefully. They found ways to integrate scientific knowledge with spiritual practice instead of seeing them as opposites. Precisely. They realized that explaining how something works does not explain away why it matters. That understanding the mechanics of love does not make love less real or valuable. Lieutenant Morrison looked puzzled. But how do we apply this to humanity? Our species has a tendency to see science and religion as competing worldviews. The archive's patterns pulsed thoughtfully. This will be humanity's great test. You must learn to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. A sunrise can be photons hitting your retina and also be a daily miracle. A human life can be a collection of biological processes and also be infinitely precious. Prayer can be neural activity and also be communion with something greater. Captain Hayes nodded slowly. We need to find ways to share this knowledge that strengthen human traditions instead of undermining them. Indeed. And you must do so carefully, gradually, with great wisdom. Perhaps start with those who already understand that science and spirituality can coexist. Religious leaders who also embrace scientific discovery. Scientists who maintain their personal faiths. Build bridges between these communities. Margaret felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They were carrying back to Earth perhaps the most important discovery in human history, but also the most dangerous. What if we fail? What if humanity can't maintain this balance? Then your species will join the 3,000 others in my memory banks, the archive said sadly. You will achieve great things for a time, then gradually lose the will to continue. Your children will ask why they should have children of their own. Your artists will wonder why beauty matters. Your explorers will question why discovery is worthwhile. The images of dead civilizations flickered briefly in the display, a stark reminder of what was at stake. But, the archive continued, its voice brightening, you also have something those other species lacked. You have this knowledge before you've made their mistakes. You can choose a different path. Dr. Barnes looked up from her notes. What would success look like? How would we know we're doing it right? You would see human civilization continuing to advance technologically while maintaining the diversity of beliefs and practices that give your lives meaning. You would see science and religion working together instead of fighting each other. You would see humans who can understand the physics of consciousness while still finding prayer meaningful, who can map the genetics of love while still believing love is sacred. Thomas Fletcher smiled slightly. A civilization that gets smarter without losing its soul. Beautifully put, the archive agreed. That is the goal few achieve but all must strive for. As the Endeavour prepared to depart, Margaret realized they were returning to Earth not as conquering explorers bringing back alien treasures, but as careful guardians carrying humanity's most precious secret. The greatest discovery wasn't about distant civilizations or ancient technology. It was about recognizing that humanity's oldest songs, stories, and prayers weren't obstacles to progress but the very thing that made progress worthwhile. In a galaxy filled with the silence of species who had reasoned themselves out of existence, Earth's continuing chorus of diverse faiths represented not ignorance but wisdom. The journey home would be just the beginning of humanity's greatest challenge and greatest opportunity.